So thank you, Will, and thank you to Tony and the team for putting together another one in this series of B4E conferences. And we have worked very closely with this series over the last several years, and it has proven to be very fertile territory for developing and mobilizing support for solutions for the challenge of climate change. All of you saw the headlines in the last couple of weeks that we have reached 400 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. That's, of course, a headline because it's a round number, but it should be a very scary number. We have not been at that level of CO2 in the atmosphere in all of human history. And for me, the scarier fact about that number is it reminds us that we are condemned to roughly 1.5 degrees of temperature rise from the carbon already in the atmosphere and the momentum that that has created. And it's worth noting that over the last 10,000 years, temperature has never varied by more than 1 degree. And it is over that 10,000 years that modern civilization emerged, that modern agriculture emerged, that we got the society, built the society that we know today. So the prospect of going beyond that frontier, to which we are already condemned, should be, to all of us, a sobering one. And it should be the starting points for this conference. Now, you hear a lot in recent months about fracking. And let's just be clear, there is no way we're going to frack ourselves out of this problem. Right? The International Energy Agency tells us that if we shift to gas as the permanent solution, we're looking at 3.5 degrees centigrade of temperature rise. And talk about uncharted territory. 3.5 degrees is completely mind-blowing in terms of the potential impacts on all of us. So while we face this growing challenge, a challenge that has grown persistently over the 20 years, 25 years that I've worked on it, we see political leaders continue to struggle to find a way to come to grips with the action that is needed. And you see that here in the UK, which has been a leader legislatively, but the Treasury doing much less than it needs to do to turn that leadership into reality. Now, we look ahead to 2015, and 2015 can be, and of course needs to be, a turning point in this effort. It is the year in which the United Nations promises to come together around a set of sustainable development goals, applying to all countries that embrace the full scope of the challenge of sustainability. It's also the year in which we are promised a new global climate deal will be on the table. So part of our work here should be keyed to that date. What needs to happen over the next 2 years to make sure that those processes yield the action that they must? And in particular, on the climate side, that somehow the global deal that comes on the table in 2015 is one that promises that emissions will peak and begin to decline within the 5 years that follow. Because that's what it takes, in fact, to keep temperatures from spinning out of control. Now, there are a lot of things that have to happen over the next year and a half to set us on a path for getting to that kind of deal. One is, of course, for the parties to the Kyoto Protocol to ratify a second commitment period, to say they're going to build on the modest progress they've already made and get serious about delivering more. A second is to recognize that a lot of important pledges were made, especially in the run-up to Kyoto, and those pledges need to be translated into action. Each of those countries needs a credible policy framework for delivering on what it said it would do. A third is for every country to be looking at how it prevents the lock-in of decades of further high emissions from the construction of coal plants and other infrastructure that set them on an unsustainable course. The fourth is to deliver on the often promised commitment to end fossil fuel subsidies. I mean, it is, of course, perverse that we are pouring literally hundreds of billions of dollars into supporting an industry that's taking us the wrong direction. And a final one is for governments to get serious about pathways to clean energy. You've seen a lot of the subsidy programs and other programs for encouraging clean energy fall by the wayside in times of austerity, and that, of course, has to be reversed. So there's a lot we should be looking for governments to do in the lead up to 2015. And I think this conference has a role to play in calling on governments to step up in that way. But this conference is also about how the private sector steps up. And that's what Climate Positive is all about. 1998, WWF created a program called Climate Savers. At the time, industry was, and I'm sure including many companies in this room, shoulder to shoulder opposed to action on climate change. Across the board, almost every company, at least taking a public position, was saying that action on climate change would wreck the economy, that it simply could not be afforded. And in that moment, climate savers and similar programs in a couple of other groups played a crucial role because some companies began to break ranks and began to say, you know, this is a problem that we need to take responsibility for. And in 1998, that looked like taking responsibility for emissions from your own operations. And for me, the success of climate savers and similar programs in those early years was to recognize, to reveal the impressive initial gains that could be made simply by paying attention, simply by looking for ways to increase the efficiency of your operations, to reduce needless emissions. And a lot of progress was made in that approach. But that's not where we are today. Leadership today in the private sector is a wholly different proposition. Paying attention to your operations should be just a ticket to entry. I mean, to be a leader in this debate, to be a leader in action on climate, you need to be serious about being climate positive. Now, what does that mean? Climate positive means being serious about looking way beyond the scope of your own operations, looking at all the ways in which your company can make a difference on this issue. So it starts with looking across your whole value chain and saying, where are the big emissions across my entire value chain? Often, they will not be in your operations. The example of Unilever is, of course, a familiar one. Right? Unilever looks at its margarine and other food product businesses and realizes that the big carbon emissions are in their supply chain, in particular, the clearing of forest to grow palm oil. So Unilever set out to tackle palm oil and to shift its suppliers to sustainable production. They look at their detergent business and they realize the big carbon emissions are not in operations, they're in use, because detergents then required hot water. So they make a cold water detergent and figuring out ways to get their customers to shift to something which has a much lower carbon footprint. But every company has a similar story, and the trick is to look across your value chain and to say, what role can we play from the center of this value chain that allows us to reduce its overall carbon footprint? And often, that will be outside the scope of your own operations. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to look at the role you can play in policy. I was struck in 2007, 2008, 2009 that many companies were saying the right things about what needed to happen in Copenhagen. We're calling for a price on carbon, we're calling for ambitious targets, etc. But very few companies were really fighting for those things. And we need to see companies fighting for climate action the way you would fight for any legislation or any action that was crucial to the future of your business, because this is. And so it's not enough to have a position paper that says, yes, we should do something about this problem. In fact, fighting for it with all of the political clout at your disposal is completely crucial. Right? And that's a big step up, but that's a central part of being climate positive. The third is driving systemic change. This, again, doesn't come naturally in many cases. But what we're seeing is a growing number of companies recognizing they can be part of driving much broader change if they look not only at their own value chains, but they look at how to inspire action in their entire sector. And that requires making this a pre-competitive issue. It's not an issue in which you're trying to distinguish yourself from your competitor. It's an issue in which you are joining forces. And one of the best examples I know of this is the work of the Consumer Goods Forum. A couple hundred of the world's largest consumer products companies, 50 of them have joined together in a commitment to eliminate deforestation from their supply chains by 2020. A significant commitment to action on climate change. And it's 50 companies looking at how they together can drive their supply chains towards sustainability in terms of beef, soy, palm oil, timber, the big drivers of deforestation around the world. And that's companies coming together across competitive boundaries to find a way to make bigger things happen. And then the last, of course, is to deploy disruptive business models. And you all have examples of this, but it is to look at, how do we think differently about what our business is and could be, and how do we come up with radically new options for our customers? Car sharing is an obvious example that help people reduce emissions in their own lives by making available to them different choices. So these are the kinds of things that we'll be talking about over the next 2 days. They are fraught with huge potential, and they are a reminder that We have to be driving government to take the action we all need it to take. We will not solve this problem without government action. So the statement from here and the actions of your companies to lobby governments will be important. And at the meantime, we can create momentum for that change if we get serious about change within the private sector. And there are very promising avenues for that. So I look forward to a very promising 2 days. I thank again the organizers. This is a crucial time on this issue, and we can really make a difference here. Thank you very much.